Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, this is a continuation on the series about the vortex model as it relates to the imbalances of geospatial inconsistencies in space. And so we're just going to go back to particles for a little bit and describe further in detail as to why we're not really dealing with particles so much as we are dealing with the change in space, which of course this is all based upon the vortex model, what I like to call the vortex model. And so the continuation on to the particle model is going to be extended into radiation and what really produces what would be considered frequencies and that sort of thing. So going back, also one other thing I want to talk about briefly how I arrived at why I believe this is what's happening fundamentally, rather than what the current scientific model accepts, which is the particle wave model. And going back here again, if we're looking at an electron here, it doesn't really look like an electron so much as it does look like a vortex, which is essentially pulling space in from the surrounding environment, the environment being geospatially zero, or really dimensionless, meaning it has no dimensions. So it's being pulled into this what would be considered a vortex. Since the electron, what we consider the electron, has spin, so too does the vortex. This I believe is two vortexes on top of each other, one spinning in a clockwise and the other spinning in a counterclockwise direction. And so that is the vortex model, where the electron would be geospatially cohered to what would be a proton down here. And I went over this in my last video, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But space is being pulled in, and of course this is considered to be a negative electron and a positive proton. The proton is cohered spatially to this electron, which is pulling space, and this is pulling this space down towards it. So I want to move on to what I believe is going on with signals and radiation and that sort of thing, because in the scientific community they also believe that a particle can behave as a wave, and I'm going to disprove this as false, because it essentially does behave like a particle and a wave, but that doesn't really go into depth far enough as to what it is and why it behaves that way. Again, a particle and a wave or radioactive decay is just a representation of something that's happening. I already went over the particle. I'm going to go over radioactive decay first. And so what I believe is happening is, again, going back to the Newtonian model, where you have, a bunch of like protons and neutrons and electrons on the outside, and essentially in a normal configuration, when there isn't nuclear decay happening, the electrons and protons and neutrons, everything's balanced. So in unbalanced situation where I believe, what is it, like maybe a neutron or maybe a proton, I'm trying to think back to chemistry, is missing, right? And so you have, they should say particles are coming off then. And I don't think that's, again, that's, there really are no particles, and therefore there are no waves. However, they are correct in the fact that there is something missing in the overall scheme of things. And so going from the Newtonian model to the geospatial vortex model, we're going to say that, let's say a proton's missing. And so I consider that to be a permanent broken symmetry of the vacuum, or of null space, whatever type of terminology you want to use. But what's happening is, normally, like I said in my previous video, in order to get an electron to get excited, going from the ball and stick model to the vortex model, the energy is coming in from the vacuum, from this direction, and I'm actually going to say that it's not actually coming directly at a right angle from null space or null space. And I'm going to go with the assumption that Ken Wheeler was suggesting, that there are no straight lines in the universe. So I'm going to say that it's actually coming in like this, from this direction, and exiting out like this, right? So the space is being cohered, and it may be that it's at zero geometric space for just a fraction of a second when it's squeezed like that, and then it starts back on out as radiation and decay, and what would be considered a particle when it comes out in this direction. But when you put energy in like that, right, so we're just going to use this arrow now, and like that, this electron, this part of the vortex, gets excited, and it goes like this, in a higher state. So with that in mind, and again, I already went over this in my previous video, with that in mind, I want to move on to what it looks like radioactively, because they say there's a decay and it keeps decaying and keeps decaying until it decays into a lesser particle on the periodic table, or a different particle. And you know, it's funny because mainstream science, they say matter and energy cannot be created nor destroyed, but yet they basically tell you it can be destroyed just by talking about radioactive decay, and I don't think they even realize what they're talking about. But anyways, that's the way I look at it, at least. So going back to this, I'm going to say that, let's say there's a permanent broken symmetry, and there's a, let's say there's something missing here, and so we're going to go back to the electron here, right, the vortex. And so what it looks like on either side here is there's actually, in null space, there's other vortices on the other side here, and you can see it in the shape like that, right? So if it goes like that, right, it has another vortex like that. Okay, and that's kind of a poor drawing. And so the protons down here, usually, you know, cohere to this portion of space. And so my guess is, in order to get radioactive decay, so a permanent broken symmetry of the vacuum, something's going on here, and I'm not quite sure what it is yet, where one of these is missing, or stopped, I believe. And so you have an asymmetrical type situation where this is always constantly being forced, and it might actually be down here. And in fact, it might be that in what Ken Wheeler would call counter space or null space, might be that the proton that's missing, so you know, this part of, excuse me, my bad, it's beginning to be a mess. So if this is the proton down here, so maybe this is broken, right? So there's nothing pulling the electron in. You understand? Because remember, the proton keeps the electron stable. They're spatially cohered. So, you know, usually it's, the vacuum is being pulled in like this. And so if the proton's down here, if it's no longer working and functioning like it should, so this vacuum energy is shut off, the space goes from pulling in this direction to free flowing out. The electron can now freely flow out in that direction. So it's almost like you're continuously exciting the electron, because there's nothing to pull it back. pull this space back in towards what you would consider the atom. So now moving on to, I'm going to spray this. It's getting messy. Moving on. I'm going to have to give this a second to dry. Moving on to radiation, the radiation decay. Because remember, it's radiation decay is like a permanent situation of pumping out electromagnetic waves, right? So the electron now looks like this, right? And then the counter vortex only looks like that. And so null space is kind of like this now. So it's unbalanced, and so it's being thrown out like that in all directions. And so what happens is it gets to this point until the space surrounding it over here, I'm going to redraw this again. You know, this is getting monotonous. So the vortex of the electron is like this, right? Because it's a broken symmetry. And the surrounding space keeps pinching it and pinching it. And so then it goes like to the next level like this until the space over here becomes flat, becomes zero. At that point, what you would consider an electromagnetic particle is released from what would be considered the atom, or the electron of the atom, right? And so it gets cut off from, if this is the counter vortex of the electron, right? This is the electron, and what happens? It goes in that direction. It gets pulled into that direction. Because I don't believe there's any actual movement in the geospatial model, like my vortex model, and that will be a lecture for a later date. But what happens is it breaks off, and that is your radioactive particle. And they break off at different frequencies, which can cause all the damaging effects and that sort of thing. But it's because I believe the proton is no longer geometrically coherent to the electron, and because null space on this side is always in balance with these particles in our space, there's a broken geometric symmetry, and you have a permanent situation where it keeps doing that until it no longer does that. And I'm not sure why it stops. I would have to think more about that, and maybe if I do think about it, I can put it up on the board in a later lecture. But that's that. And what was I? So that's that. There was one other topic that I wanted to go through. And oh yeah, I want to talk about where I came up with this model. My model comes from several different sources, like reading, the standard literature that we're all given in college and high school, so physics and chemistry and that sort of thing, but also diving into other people's works, such as Tom Bearden, um, Charles Proteus Steinmetz, Nikola Tesla, uh, just to name a few. What else? John Bedini, Floyd Sweet. So there's quite a few names. Some names online. Ken Wheeler, I mentioned him once before. Who else? MTech Industries, Joel Legacy. So, but I don't want to sit here and just keep talking about where my influences come from, and of course, my own thoughts and ideas as to how this all relates to one another and how it goes together. But I would say that the most inspiring thing would be nature, and the thing is, I use what I call the geospatial model, where the vortex is changing to such a degree that it's changing space itself. And the funny thing is really you can see the vortex everywhere in nature, and the vortex is really, let's be honest, it's basically modeled after the Fibonacci sequence. And the Fibonacci sequence is they kind of make it, put it in a box or whatever like this. And it's just like this, a spiral, right? And there's numbers involved, like the golden ratio and different types of mathematics as to how they break it up and stuff like that. And I'm not going to go over that, but I'm just saying that that's one of the prime things where I model the behavior of the universe after. And the vortex or Fibonacci sequence, whatever you want to say, again, it's everywhere in nature. You just look at a snail shell, it kind of looks like that, right? And it's sort of like that, not the best drawer. And it goes like that, right? It's a vortex. It's the Fibonacci sequence, and that's just a snail shell. A pine tree model looks like that. So does a cob of corn. Just look anywhere, really. And what else? Like looking at a galaxy with what they would consider a black hole. It kind of looks like this, where they'll have like energy shooting out like that, right? It's the same thing. It looks like a vortex. And what else? Freaking, even when you, I know this is kind of silly, but even when you drain your bathtub, you know, if you have your drainer, it looks like that, right? Like it's being pulled in. And it's always the same spiral pattern. It's not like it's like triangular or something, like when it's being drained, you know, it's not like that. It's a spiral, curvilinear. So yeah, what else was I gonna go over? Well, I talked about radioactive decay. I talked about my influences. I think I was going to talk about like different frequencies, whether it be like light or radio frequencies and that sort of thing, which is, you know, a form of radiation, but we're putting the energy into it. Well, you know, I think I will. I know I was going to put that in this video, but it's getting kind of long and I'm getting kind of tired, so I think I'm going to end it right there. And with the different frequencies as it relates to a sort of non-broken symmetry situation of the vacuum, I think I will save that for a later video. Bye, everyone.